Have any of you ever felt a really strong connection with any of your family members?
Yeah.
It's weird, right? Like you would do anything for them and they would do anything for you. So there's this ancient Chinese belief that there's a red thread connecting everybody in the world that's destined to be together. And this story is called The Red Thread. So one day, this little girl runs up to her mom and dad, and she's carrying a book, and she says that she really wants them to read it to her. And so they've read this story millions of times to her before, but they decide to read it anyway. So she hops up on their lap, and they get on the couch, and they begin to read the story. Now the story is of a king and a queen who rule over this awesome kingdom. Nothing ever goes wrong in this kingdom. However, one morning the queen wakes up and she has this terrible ache in her heart. And the king wakes up and he feels the terrible ache in his heart too. And now these are really wealthy people, so they call doctors and scientists from all over the world to come to their kingdom and figure out what's wrong with them, but no one can find out what's wrong. And one day a peddler comes to their house and knocks on the door, and they open the door, and he sees with his glasses this big red string all over the room and connecting from her heart to his heart, and it's just a tangled mess in which with each move that they make, it gets more and more painful for them. And they can't see the thread, so the peddler gives his glasses to the queen, and she sees the thread. And then she gives the glasses to the king, and he sees the thread. And so they start to cut the thread, and it can't cut. And they take a knife, and they try and cut it with a knife, and the thread will not break. And so the peddler says, the only thing to release the pain is to find out what's on the other end of the red thread. So the king and the queen set out on a journey, and it's a very treacherous journey, so they bundle up. And they cross mountains of snow, and their shoes begin to wither, and their clothes begin to tear, and they have to untangle the string from really large branches on trees, and they cross a vast sea, and on the end of that sea is a really small village. Now that they're at the village, they can see a cottage on the other side of the land, and they start to run to the cottage because that's where their red thread is leading them. In the cottage, there's a little baby, and the baby looks up at the king and the queen, and she smiles the biggest smile. And now the villagers at this strange land are confused that there's a king and a queen there. So they followed the king and the queen to the cottage, and they're making a fuss. And the queen says, "Who is this baby, or whose baby is this?" And the villagers are speaking a language that they've never heard before, and an elder makes its way through the crowd and up to the king and the queen. And she says, "This baby is yours." And so the king and the queen take the baby back to their village, and they live a very happy life. Their hearts never hurt ever again, and their family was complete. And so the mom and the dad close the storybook, and they look down at their adopted daughter, and they say, "Yes, that's our favorite story too." The end.
Aww.